The most influential man for the global financial markets, Jerome Powell, has just spoken. The whole world's listening. We're going to take a look at what he announced in his speech. There were a few surprises, but some people were also very, very disappointed. Plus, we only have a few hours left until possibly the most shocking statement and announcement of the year. Announcement of the year from Donald Trump. Yes, we now have indications that today the successor to Jerome Powell could be announced in just a few hours. There are now several scenarios here that are possible for Bitcoin. We need to take a very close look because this is truly one of the most important decisions for Bitcoin. Liquidity is the decisive factor when it comes to whether we'll see a year-end rally and really enter a bull market next year, or whether we're about to go fully into a bear market. On top of that, we now have a ticking time bomb here. Mario Nawon, the billion-dollar time bomb nobody saw coming. This whole thing is also connected to Donald Trump. Here, there could be massive repayments of tariffs happening, and that could really shake up the entire economy in the US and globally. Let's dive into all of this, folks, but before we get started, take a quick second and smash that like button for Bitcoin, freedom, and decentralization. And as a thank you, I'll show you Jupiter. It should be somewhere around here. Take a look. Can any of you spot it? If you do, drop it in the comments below. And now we really need to prepare for both scenarios here. Wagner says the same thing. This mindset has helped me a lot. He's preparing for a pullback to $50,000, but he would never bet his money on it. In the long run, he still believes in a $1 million Bitcoin price. And I think that's a pretty good attitude, to just stay open-minded in the short term for all possible outcomes. But in the long run, we know where Bitcoin is headed, or where the Bitcoin price is going. We just saw that again recently. Now with strategy, we've seen just how irrational the market can be at times. A lot of OGs celebrated what Saylor's doing. Still, the stock sold off at first. And now we're just getting to it. Jerome Powell, the speech. Then we'll get to the mega announcement that could be coming here in just a few hours. Because honestly, that was really, really interesting. When Jerome Powell speaks, you always expect, okay, is he going to say something about interest rate policy, about monetary policy? Now we know for sure. Quantitative tightening is over. That was the big speech where people thought, okay, maybe he'll drop some hints. Are we heading toward QE now, or where are we going from here? But what's really interesting is what we can take away from this. From his speech, it's clear that zero new info. Just a classy tribe tribute to George Shultz. The markets were hoping for a Santa rally, a signal for it, but instead got a lecture about stagflation from the seats. There's just a bunch of talk about Paul Volcker and how they raised interest rates back then, and so on. So I would actually say the speech wasn't bullish at all, but rather hawkish. In other words, actually pretty negative. They talked about the possibility of raising interest rates here, and about historical cases where that happened. It was actually kind of an indirect attack, basically against Donald Trump, since Trump always wants to lower interest rates. They also talked about centralization, saying it's bad when the government gets involved somewhere, when the government imposes price controls, when the government makes central interventions. I think that was also a bit of a jab, a dig at Donald Trump, because Trump has now started interfering a lot in the economy, even getting involved in some companies, and whatever else he's doing there. The hard facts remain, though. QT is now over. There might be more liquidity coming into the market now. And on the 10th of December, we have an 87% chance of interest rate cuts. So those are definitely the positive things here. I also found Herman's assessment here. The banker, very, very interesting. He points out the paradox. According to the current data, while the price is collapsing, whales have accumulated 375,000 Bitcoin. Miners have reduced their monthly sales from 23,000 Bitcoin to just 3,600 Bitcoin. Someone is buying what the institutions are dumping. The decisive turning point here will be the 18th. December? I think that's wrong. It's the 10th. December here with the Fed meeting. Or am I wrong? And just dumb? Write it down for me in the comments below. But I think the 10th. December should be correct. Fed interest rate decision. And the Bank of Japan is coming up as well, because they will also decide whether to lower interest rates or not. Honestly, I could imagine that the Bank of Japan is even more relevant. Because if the Fed lowers interest rates by 25 basis points now, okay, cool. That gives the market a bit more liquidity. But if the Bank of Japan raises interest rates, man, it's going to wreck the entire financial market. Not just in the US, but worldwide. With Bitcoin and the like, the carry trade will implode, and then there will probably be a real blow to all the financial markets. So those are the next two super relevant events when it comes to interest rate hikes, plus clear tightening signals. Bitcoin could drop again to around 75,000 or 69,000. That's his assessment. If there's a pause, so if we now have the end of QT or dovishness, we could see a short squeeze. So if interest rates in Japan don't go down, QT is already over, and rates in the US go down, then you could see a kind of short squeeze and a lot of bears will probably get flushed out of the market. And then he says that within a few days, the price of Bitcoin could also reach 100,000 US dollars. It's really, really important if we reach the 100,000 mark. That would be important because then we'd have the green year. Otherwise, the 4-year cycle would be broken. Then it would always be green, 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 red. So 3 green years, 3 positive years for Bitcoin, and 1 negative year. The negative year would actually be next year. We've never had it before that, basically, in the 3rd year after the pattern. Well, to put it correctly, in the 3rd year after the 2 previous positive years, we've at least never had a down year then. And now we have to, we don't have to pray. That's saying too much. We can just take it easy. We can just live our lives. It's best not to let the price drive you crazy and just watch how things develop. And if it goes down, you can buy more. If it goes up, you could be happy too. That's the cool part. We also see that the Fed just injected another $13.5 billion in overnight repo positions into the banking system, the 2nd biggest liquidity boost since COVID. So it's already a small liquidity injection. Of course, it's still a small amount, a tiny, tiny sum. That means in the short term, a bit more liquidity, but also, on the other hand, more uncertainty. But it could still be a slightly bullish sign because liquidity leads to a softer dollar. A softer dollar leads to people being more likely to move into risk assets, which means Bitcoin benefits in this case. And now we're getting to the real bombshell. This is probably almost the most important thing, because honestly, Jerome Powell's speech was more or less a nothing burger. What's really relevant now is that, by now, the odds are that this man here, Kevin Hesed, Jerome Powell's successor, is at 93%. And now, please take a look at this. Sources, including Treasury Secretary Scott Bassett, report that Trump has already nominated his candidates for the chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve, and the announcement is expected to be made before Christmas. And now, pay attention. Trump confirmed aboard Air Force One that the announcement could come soon, possibly on the 2nd or 3 December, so possibly even today will be a success. According to Kalshi, exactly here, Kalshi even says there is now a 75% probability that it will become hazardous. Hased's nomination would suggest a growth-friendly, loose monetary policy, faster interest rate cuts, higher inflation tolerance, and a weakness in the dollar, which would likely boost stocks and cryptocurrencies. That means if Kevin Hesed is actually appointed today as the new Fed chair, as Jerome Powell's successor, then there could actually be a little delay. Whether that's enough for a year-end rally, I'm still not sure. 100% sure. But that would definitely be positive. And now, attention, big plot twist. Now the news is just coming in right here. President Trump says he wants to make a big announcement today at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday. So 2 p.m. Eastern Time. That should be sometime when y'all are sleeping, or maybe not necessarily, but definitely in the evening. At some point, it'll be in your time zone. And that could get very, very interesting, because if that really turns out to be the case and Kevin actually does it here, and I think the chances aren't too high, I wouldn't necessarily say so right now. Over 50%, but let's say maybe just under 50% probability that this gets announced today, then that would definitely be a very, very bullish story here. And then, of course, we still have the ticking time bomb that Mario Naval is talking about here. Why the Costco tariff lawsuit could trigger economic chaos. So Costco is actually suing Donald Trump here, and the whole thing could have dramatic effects on the financial markets. So to explain to you what's happening here, Costco is suing to secure refunds for tariffs in case the Supreme Court later declares the Trump tariffs illegal because of the tariff deadline on December 15th. Otherwise, companies could permanently lose their rights to reimbursement. That means they have to sue now. More and more companies, Revlon, Kawasaki, and so on, are filing protective lawsuits. If Trump loses, the government would have to pay back hundreds of billions. So we're not talking about millions here, but billions. Deficit shock, front market stress. Then we have rising interest rates. Definitely on the long end, probably not on the short end right now, but likely on the long end. Lower courts have already ruled against Trump several times. The Supreme Court is skeptical, or at least appears to be. And now, pay attention. Costco is taking action because the legal uncertainty is too great. This is a signal for many more lawsuits to come. The case is a stress test for Trump's entire tariff strategy and could have massive economic consequences. And not just for the US. It could, of course, have consequences for the whole world. We've seen recently just how strong the impact of these tariffs has been. I mean, lately it kind of felt like this topic was finally starting to fade away. Now they're back again, starting up with lawsuits over tariffs and this and that, back and forth, blah, blah, blah. Honestly, it's starting to get a bit annoying, if we're being real. But I mean, what can you do? That's just how it is. But what isn't being considered in this whole story? What's gotten really, really quiet now with all the chaos going on, Fed, Jerome Powell, tariffs, blah, 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 you don't hear anything anymore about the strategic Bitcoin reserve. And we need to take a look at one more thing, because it fits perfectly here with this. Here we have Macroscope, and he says something very, very interesting here. He says, attention, attention. It's been a while since we've heard anything about the strategic Bitcoin reserve or a possible Bitcoin purchase by the US government. And why is it so important now? When things get very turbulent in the market, but you know something hasn't disappeared, that can be a good time to take a closer look. And now Scott Bessent comes back into play because he's been observing quite a bit here for some time. Namely, that Bessent is, first of all, a stock market expert, a trader with a passion. He knows that the legal ways to buy Bitcoin are slow and very public. It's just very difficult to buy Bitcoin publicly, which is why making a move ahead is likely, especially by other nations. I consider legislation to be very important for long-term reasons, and it will ultimately happen in some form. But here, it's all about the price and Bessent's assessment. It's easy to imagine that Bessent watched the recent Bitcoin sell-off with the mindset of an opportunistic trader. Would it really be surprising to eventually get a public statement along those lines? In line with this government's stated goal of strengthening U.S. leadership in the tech sector, the U.S. Treasury has now bought such and such amount of Bitcoin, or decided we are now going to massively accumulate Bitcoin. So he thinks that these current pullbacks could actually be a big opportunity for the U.S. right now, maybe even a once-in-a-lifetime chance. And he also points out, importantly, that the ESF, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, is not set up in real time. The Treasury Department publishes annual reports and also monthly reports. But in practice, Bessent would certainly make a public statement about this long before that information is officially released. It's hard to ignore or hard to forget that he showed up at the opening of PubKey DC right in the middle of the current Bitcoin sell-off. So they're still hanging out at the Bitcoin bar. Now there's speculation about whether, maybe through this ESG, Exchange Stabilization, ESSF, Exchange Stabilization, where the Bitcoin could possibly be secretly accumulated through it, since that might only be reported later on. I mean, I don't know. Feel free to write your thoughts about it in the comments below. I can only say one thing. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, then definitely check it out. Here at 21 Bitcoin. Oh, my t-shirt is all dirty. Law. And yeah, cold. Bitcoin Hotels still gets you up to 20% off at 21 Bitcoin. Save on fees when buying Bitcoin. See ya. Peace.